All right,
Bring it alive.
bring on the green plastic tunnels. There he is.
Hey.
Woohoo!
How you doing, Dove?
How's it going, man?
It's going all right, you know. Another Sunday.
So for people who are watching who don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself? Tell everyone who you are, what you do.
Yeah, sure. My name is Andrew Gedded. I use the fake company name, I guess, Green Plastic Tunnels, to make my stuff. I've been casting for, I don't know, like 8 years, like kind of working in the art toy scene or community. Yeah, I mean, did you have any? I guess we can start with questions. I don't really have much to start with.
I mean, you were one of the earliest artists like to come to the scene. I guess, can you talk about how you got, like, what sparked the idea for you to actually start casting and creating figures?
So when I first started casting, the first time I tried it with wax, and actually the first thing that I ever cast was a Swamp Thing back in 1990, when that became like a big toy property. I remember having it, and my dad worked in toys, so he showed me how to make a mold of it, and I made a couple casts in wax, and I thought it was awesome. And I was like, man, it'd be cool if like I can make a ton of these, because I'd seen some of the stuff that he had brought home from when he worked at Kenner and for like freelancing for a couple other companies. And I was really taken with like test shots and stuff, because it was like a recognizable form or something that was familiar and something you'd play with, but you have a different appreciation for it, almost kind of seeing it in its primitive sort of state, I guess. But what happened was I was walking to Novelty House that's run by Noel Conrad in Baltimore, probably 2013. And I was looking around, I was telling him what my dad had done professionally when I was a kid growing up. And he's like, oh, you'll love these, check this out. He's mostly into kaiju and stuff, but worked a little bit with resin. Showed me the work of Mike Kirchhoff, and I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. And it's sort of like all these things kind of came to my head, and I'm like, man, I got to get involved in this. I went home and did some research and found out Manny Toys, who was a blog for everything art toys. I think they're called Soft Toy Hobby now. But anyways, I was like, man, I gotta get involved in this. I feel like I have something I want to do. So I started cutting figures up and putting them together. And the first thing I did was like a Tron figure, like the Guardian guy that has the gas mask and the shoulder pads. I took that and added some Star Wars arms, and started participating that way. It was kind of small, and then talking to other people, eventually meeting Mike in person, and just about everybody else, it seems, that started around that time.
I would say of all the artists in the scene, and something that when I talk to young artists, I always talk to them about having a voice, and a voice in this world is, to me, is like being able to see someone's work from across the room, and without being told, be able to distinguish that as that person's work. And there's very few people who can actually achieve that, because a lot of this work tends to look very much the same, and you usually need to get it in your hand and read it before you realize actually who did it. But you're one of the few artists that, like, a green plastic tunnels toy when you see it, and you've developed a very kind of, like, I don't know what you call it, like a reductive kind of style that is, you're not, am I correct? Like, there's no words on your packages either, right?
I don't usually use a lot of text. I'm interested in it, and I'm not opposed to it. I've tried to, first of all, thanks for the comments there. Those are inspiring. But yeah, I
You know,
don't
and
have a
then,
lot. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, go on.
I was just gonna say, I don't know that I always have a lot to say with words. I'm really fascinated with thesaurus and like kind of establishing a lexicon of words to describe certain things, or kind of like come up with titles by just playing around with this thesaurus and stuff, but also kind of generating all these different parts. So I kind of feel like that's the vocabulary, but as far as writing green plastic tunnels, I started doing that more lately, just in case somebody's like, what the hell is this, that has, just comes
Right.
across it
But
and
I'm
wants
just
to
saying
do like a Google search.
but your card backs, it's not part of your work to have a logo or to have like your work is
Right.
it's like it, you've reduced everything down to, I was talking to Josh Kimberg from Clutter yesterday, and it was like, he brought up the piece that you did for Inaction this year, where you've like just reduced it down to like this shape and this other thing on there. And I think it's also interesting that not only have you like reduced the work down to colors and shapes, but then when I ask you to talk about it, you don't have a lot to say about it. Like, it's like, right, if like people create art, right, and then people like me or magazines or press like want people to like talk about their art, right? But the true answer to any question about your art is like, I've actually said everything I need to say with the piece of art. What else do you want me to talk about? Like, it is what it is. But
Right. And I'm not against like elaborating more on things, but I just kind of like to leave it out there, like this is it maybe, and then kind of to develop your own narratives about the works. I don't know, I'm an elementary art teacher by trade, and that's what I do during the day and the school year. And I think that there's a lot of pressure like on kind of developing like different kinds of ideas and stuff, and having it a very like, it has to be this, it has to be this specific thing. That's what art has to be. And I think that that puts a lot of people off, and when it's too specific like that. So I try to leave them with the idea like it's okay to leave questions unanswered. I think it leaves a little bit more like fun to play around with in your head that way,
sure.
to kind of be like, well, I know what he said, but let's go with my knowledge of this, especially. And that's one of the things that I think brought me into all the kit bashed resin figures, is just like, yes, this like makes sense in this color. And it's a familiar object, but how can we kind of remove that, or remove some narrative? Like the piece you're talking about at Clutter is called Battle Cat, because it's based off of that He-Man
Right.
toy. Did you have that one as a kid, Dove?
I didn't, but I'm very familiar with it.
I didn't either, but yeah, it's kind of like part of the 70s, 80s kids vocabulary. Like it was a common toy, something you saw a lot. I guess when I put that together, I had put together like some different textures that I thought might be kind of cool to play around with sculpturally. And so that was just aluminum foil, cast in red resin. And I've been playing around with PETG or PETG, like used for thermoforming, like what you make the bubbles out of. So I started thermoforming over some of my shapes using one of those Mattel Vacuform toys from the 60s. You spray it with spray paint afterwards, and then sometimes it'll crack. So then you put on another color, and then you're like, whoa, that kind of looks cool. It's kind of like this this green and yellow bright pattern, but then you've got this red sheen that kind of reminds you of Battle Cat. You're like, oh, this is a piece,
I think one of my favorite pieces of yours is I think as a step before this, is when you reduced it, like you would do your 3 3/4 inch figures in a package, and the card art was just like a few, no words and just a few shapes. But then
Mhm.
you released one where the figure was just a shape. It looked like, just some malformed kind of like Lego piece. And then
Yeah.
that was it.
Yeah.
I was like, that was that. And I looked at that and I just thought like, oh, like that's brilliant.
Oh,
It's like you're playing with the form,
mhm.
and it's in a blister, so you know what it's supposed to be, but then it's like completely alien. So it was something that I did a interview the other day with Mike from Mark Ultra,
Oh,
and
nice.
he was talking about. Well, I brought a box of some of his figures that I had here, and he sort of just kind of talked about repeating the same characters over and over again,
Mhm.
and how the the very fact that he did not create a backstory and left it kind of vague who they were,
Mhm.
um, has allowed him to kind of release the same characters over and over again. Whereas if
Right.
over the years he's been making the same characters, like over 10 years, like just re-releasing, you know different colors, different paint jobs. And if he had called it a certain name and given it a story and said, this is the hero, and then the next time the bad guy, and the next time the troop, and then after a while he's got nothing left to do. And that somehow, by not explaining it, he's created a possibility for himself that he can continue to make them, and you just make up your own story, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that he does that. So I'm glad you brought him up, because that's something I admire about his work, is that he leaves it like that. I think that um having that sort of being able to recycle, not that sounds bad to say it like you're just recycling stuff, Mike, but no, I mean like the idea of taking this and then applying it to something else later. That's
Mhm.
pretty sweet.
Well, I mean, that is similar to your method also. It's like
Yeah.
there is not, a grand, I mean, maybe there is in your head, but you're at least,
Yeah.
if there's some grand saga of these characters and what they're doing, you're not sharing it with us. It's kind of like David Lynch. It's like he's clearly like makes a movie that's 4 hours long and then chops 2 hours out of it until it's unintelligible. And then if you ask him like, hey, what does that mean, he just doesn't say anything. Like it's part of the
Right.
mystery. Like it's actually what wants you to come up with. The people online and the message boards coming up with all of the different theories of what it could mean is part of the experience, rather than if he
Right.
just explained it all to you. And you know
And spelled it all out for you. Yeah. And I hope it's not too frustrating for people, but I just don't get like I think that what you're it's kind of like that anticipatory thing where you're just like, is it going to be this or that? And we slowly find out that there's not always like a direct answer. Because honestly, like when I'm making a lot of stuff, I don't have a direct answer for what's going on. It's just kind of instinctive, finding these different parts that sort of work together, especially lately,
so
which has
you're
been more geometric stuff.
so you're primarily just working like physically, like so there is not even a backstory in your mind. It's just like you say, you're working, it's instinctively, you're putting something together, it looks good, it fits your aesthetic, and then you put it
Right.
out.
Yeah, like I'll show you real quick here. Like I've got these pieces that just kind of make sense to me, like I, sort of like lined up, and I have parts, which I'll show you over here, that I kind of go through and decide like sort of what makes sense, what goes together, what colors fit. Sometimes using the pet G stuff, and then the cards. I have to go outside to spray paint now because my wife said that it smells like spray paint in the house.
Because you're killing your
Yeah.
brain cells. Yes.
Okay. In full disclosure, what was happening was I was just spraying outside the house, but it was leaking into the house, and my wife is pregnant. So she was like, are you really going to have an argument with your pregnant wife about whether or not you should be spray painting in the backyard or by the side of the house? I don't know. But I talked to my sister and she's like, yeah, one time something like that happened with me where I was spray painting without a mask. Always wear a mask with this stuff, by the way. you know, for anybody out there. Yeah, but anyways, so yeah, it's just a matter of like kind of having this like assembly line or but with no exact instructions for how things should go. And I guess that's what makes it instinctive. It's just like, you know, this seems to make sense like that. And I mean, I will have some ideas in my head that I have been working with for a long time. And it's funny because I don't know if anyone else out there feels this way, but some of like the best images you have in your head or memories are from childhood, if not like early childhood. Like, you know, you think about what was most common, it's toys. So maybe that's why I also levitated towards that. But anyways, yeah, having that sort of like, I guess, play in the work where you can just sort of pick things up and see like, you know, this makes sense. Or, oh, the other thing is, if there's anybody out there that's like thinking about getting into casting, save your miscasts. You can make some cool stuff with it sometimes. Like I've been saving a lot of that stuff, and that sort of makes it into the vocabulary or into the process as well in different ways, instead of throwing it away. And,
So
you know, oh,
yeah, go on.
I was going to say another thing that I've started thinking about. I'm sorry, I'm kind of like rambling with this here, Dove, but
We love it. Keep going.
okay, it's part of the process for how I work, I guess. You know, I think about the way a lot of this stuff makes it into the landfill, especially anybody out there who's casting in resin knows what I mean. You're getting miscasts, rubber mistakes, all kinds of shit. So you think about what you can do with your stuff, which is one of the reasons I started saving the miscasts and kind of like thinking, well, like what else can I repurpose this for? And you think about that's kind of how Kenner rolled and Hasbro and all those places. You know, it's like we got this Star Wars thing that we're now going to use for our I think it was Robin Hood. They did a bunch of that kind of stuff.
Right.
So
The Friar Tuck had a Gamorrean guard body.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
the wagon was a repurposed Ewok,
Yeah.
you know, vehicle. Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back, you know, you said your dad, you know, was a sculptor. He worked for Kenner. Did you at what age did you realize that you wanted to be an artist?
Oh, that's a good question. And it's such a weird sorted question, because I think that there's not one specific place where the answer comes from. Again, I think that when I was a kid, like when I was really little, I wanted to have something to do with toys. Oh God, I'm like swinging around all the bad parts of the basement here. But I knew I wanted to do something with toys. Like I didn't know I would do it career-wise, but I remember getting asked, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to sculpt toys like my dad out of wax.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very tedious. And I remember thinking like, I'm going to have to get really good at this. And I never really had the same abilities that he has or that my sister has. They were very intuitive and like drawing a lot of representational pictorial things. And I really struggled with that until I went to like a Saturday school, like a Saturday class at the Art Academy, Cincinnati. And I was like, oh, I kind of like this, getting loose with the charcoal, you know, and drawing figures and stuff. So I kind of had a point there where I knew that I wanted to work in the arts. But previous to that, like when I was a kid, when I was talking about that swamp thing, in fourth grade, I had just discovered a box, and like I was always going through my dad's studio, like looking at stuff because he had a ton of really cool stuff to look at. But I was always curious, and I found a small box that he said it had morgue written on the outside of it. And I opened it up, and it's like all these body parts of like superpowers and stuff in different colors, and like real.
That stuff's probably worth a fortune today, but go on.
Yeah, I should have saved more of it. But side note, because I don't want to forget this, and he sculpted, he worked with James Groman before, like way back in the day, but they had never met face to face. But he worked from James Groman's line drawings for the Mad Balls, and he sculpted a bunch of them. But my mom ended up throwing them away, and I'm like, I know one of my friends. my dad gave a hard copy of the Wolf character. He had a hard copy of it and gave it to one of my buddies, but I have no idea where he is nowadays. But sorry, I got caught up on the Mad Balls thing. What were
We were talking about, well, I'd asked you about being a kid and when you knew you wanted to be an
Oh,
artist.
right.
And
Sorry. Yeah, at different points, I was like very interested in doing something with toys, and I didn't know how that was going to work. Toys and special effects. I did a lot of kit bashing with like model cars when I was in 3rd grade, and sometimes military vehicles and stuff like that, because I read that that's how they made movies, and you know, from things that I'd seen. So I think at that point I knew I wanted to do something with toys. When I got to college, I was just the general art major. And then when I started thinking about what I really wanted to do, especially career-wise, what would garner some options, a little more options than you have in art school, it seems. I was looking into art education and graphic design, and I ended up going with I'm a graphic designer now. No, I have an interest in graphic design, but I went into art education.
And how long have you been an art teacher?
Since 2004, so like 17 years. Is that right?
And is is being an art teacher creatively fulfilling as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you naturally have a conversation with kids all the time. So you're talking about a lot of the same things that maybe you're into now, or you were into when you were their age, and you see like kind of how they're working on things, and you recognize that from before, or something that you would get excited about too as being a kid. So I think that there's a little bit of that goes with it. And also in elementary art, you don't have the same kind of pressure that you have in middle school and high school, where it's like you have to do all those things really well to stay in gifted and talented classes. But I think with the younger ones, you definitely see more like of a raw stream of consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, where they're producing work and not so hindered by a lot of things. I mean, I've worked with kids before where they are really hindered and they don't want to try new things, but you'll see that there are a lot of people and kids that want to just kind of experiment with things, and sometimes it's not called art. You know, I think that sometimes you get into that pressure of saying, well, this is art. And I know that that's a conversation that's been going on for a while with like the art toy and designer toy community.
Sure.
So
I think it's interesting because I'm gonna go so far as to say I didn't like school, and I thought that most of my teachers in school were hacks and disgruntled people, and
yeah.
so many like my friends now are teachers. And then what I find myself, and then eventually, like I was asked to, like, you know, I've lectured several times to college classes about making toys, and I found that experience, like I don't think I could cut it, like being a guest speaker for one, you know, one class is fantastic, and I found it very fulfilling. And I also find that when young people call me and they're starting out, you know, creating art, either action figures or otherwise, and you know, talking to them on the phone, that I do get something out of that. And so it's like my opinion of like teaching has like completely shifted. I also went to film school, and film school is horrible because every teacher in film school is just like, is very frustrated.
Right, I can see.
It's a frustration and like jaded, cynical machine that they kind of put you through, and horrible. But
Yeah.
moving on to you. So the person we're supposed to be interviewing.
No, I like to hear this.
You're so you find that teaching elementary school kids is fulfilling, but are you able to recognize at that age, like which kids are like, like this kid's got it? Like,
Mhm.
you can tell?
A little bit. I think you can get a feel for what they're going to be interested in for a while, but
Mhm.
you don't come across a lot of kids that are really eager to make artwork and really eager to talk with you about making artwork
Mhm.
in their life, but they definitely don't come around all the time where you're like, yeah, that's the next Picasso. People would ask you that, like, do you ever work with anybody that's like the next Picasso? I'm like, I don't know. I work with this kid named Julian. He might be the next Julian.
You should you can write a book, like stupid questions people ask art school teachers.
There's a lot of them. But yeah, I think that, yeah, I think that they work together, like getting the inspiration, but at the same time, I think you have to figure out how to have the time to make your art and
Hmm.
also do the teaching component.
Sure.
Um,
Are you at a public school or a private school?
yeah, I'm at a public school. I'm in Baltimore County Public Schools.
And isn't the trend, I mean, you just hear on the news like how extracurricular activities are just getting, budgets are getting cut, and especially at public schools, and that art and all of these kind of elective kind of things are, the budgets are shrinking, and a lot of times the classes are going away. Have you felt any pinch there?
no, I have not. One thing that I know about Baltimore County schools from my experiences so far, and this is the third school district I've worked in, is that they're very dedicated to the arts, not just within the visual arts department,
Mhm.
but just in general. I found them very supportive. So I don't feel the crunch like the job's going to get cut. I lived out in Las Vegas. That's where I taught at first. So I taught out there for 3 years. And a lot of the people that I met there were teachers from California, that were just like, there's no teaching jobs, or it's very hard to keep your job. So I don't know what it's like out there, but yeah, out here,
Yeah.
I feel very much like we're being supported. I think that there's always going to be that push and that need to stay on top of it, though, to make
Mhm.
sure that we're getting the support that we need. I have mixed feelings about the hybrid learning situation right now. Like, I'm back in the classroom with
Can
a
you talk?
smaller amount of students.
Can you talk about what that is?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, hybrid learning is just where you're teaching half the kids at home
Mhm.
through their computer at home, and then you're teaching the other kids that are in the building. They're all socially distanced, and you're teaching them at the same time. So you end up doing a lot of things like, all right, I'm going to work on the chalkboard so everybody can see, or set up the projector in different
Mhm.
ways.
But
You know?
that's just temporary. I mean, hopefully once
Yeah,
the
that's
COVID
temporary.
situation, so
Yeah.
even if you hate it, I mean, it's still gonna, and if it's not as effective, I mean, it's gonna go away. We hope.
Right. It's a short-term issue in the long run. Well, at least I hope. No, I feel. Um, but one of the things I was going to say about having to teach from home for a while before we went back in March, the beginning of March,
Mhm.
is I had a lot of time where I could run around my studio because I would teach down here, and I'd go cast in the other room before school started. And then at lunch, do another set of casting, maybe do some painting or whatever, run upstairs, see what the kids are up to. But I had more of that, like, well, this thing is just sitting around right now. And you think about how that can go with that. And
Do
sometimes
you
it lends
ever
itself to, I'm sorry.
do you share any of this work with your students? I mean, do they know that
Yeah,
about
a
your art
little
career?
bit, but I haven't been as forthcoming about it. I want to say, I make that sound like it's a bad thing, but
Right.
um I get really weird about teaching about myself, or I have been, or
Mhm.
teaching about like my artwork. Um, but I also find that there's more of a division between me and work. when I do that. So I've slowly started to talk more with the kids about what I do, because I mean, they look at my work and I don't think they're going to think like, oh yeah, how'd you draw that? So it might not have its same relation. And it's hard to figure out how to have the kids cast in resin to show them like exactly how, but you think about how you put the pieces together or what you're thinking about at the time. There's more of like a fluid connection with the materials and the thoughts that way.
And so, I mean, have you ever like held up one of your action figures, just like shown them to all the kids?
Yeah, especially like if I have something to ship.
Yeah.
Like that day later at lunch, I run over to the post office. Yeah, so sometimes that's what I'll do. I'll pick, or kids will be like, Mr. Gedded, what's that? And I'm like, oh yeah, so I've been working on these lately. And sometimes you can have those teachable moments where you're like, yeah, it was sitting on my desk and we can talk about it for a minute. But
and are there any kids who just completely don't understand and think you're weird?
Oh yeah, I'm sure. The kids I work with are pretty polite for the most part, so I can't really, I don't know, maybe they're just like being nice. But
is a lot of your time spent like disciplining kids and like keeping elementary school kids in line, or do you find that like
good question. I think there always has to be that disciplinary issue. I don't know, I've taught, like I said, this is my third school system and I don't intend on moving anywhere else, but yeah, ever since I started, you kind of have to, I think there's a relaxed attitude sometimes, like be their buddy. That doesn't work. You really have to be like the teacher and the adult in charge. But I've had different situations. Like it depends upon what kids are going through at home. I taught in Baltimore City for a little while. I don't know if anybody's watched The Wire. I get that's another question that everybody would ask me when I first moved to Baltimore. They're like, "Oh my God, have you seen The Wire? You got to see season 4." And so finally, like a few years after I had gotten out, I watched it because my wife would get HBO Go for Game of Thrones. So instead of watching Game of Thrones, I got into The Wire, and it's cool to see like some of the spots that you went through. But the school's season, if anybody's familiar with that, it does reflect a little bit of what goes on in Baltimore City public schools, like with teaching to the test. And I don't know, I had a lot of disruptions in one of the schools I worked at, or it would be periodic. Sometimes you'd have like a lot of that sort of stuff going on where you're just like, all right, everybody back here, let's focus on the art project. But also that the place where they would that was called the Pit, where they're always sitting on that orange couch outside. I was like, oh man, that's right next to the school I used to teach at. But yeah, so I mean, it depends. And it's weird because I think about my time with Baltimore City and it was really rough, but you met some really cool people and like some really cool kids out of it. And some of them you keep in contact with, and then you realize that they're almost in their 30s and you're like, oh my God, I'm old.
That's fucked up. That makes me feel old. So let's talk about your dad for a moment. So he because when you first when you introduced me to him and you showed me all the stuff that he had done, and I recently got a book. It was called it was a toy book about like all the Kenner employees, and there's a few pages in there about your dad, and it has a picture of some of the sculpts.
Yeah, Engineering an Empire, is that
Engineering an Empire? Fantastic book, and they really did not focus on like the toys or the process. It was really a book that was more about like the people. And kind of got into a fight with them because they shipped me a book, and of course, they didn't pack it well, and then they got mad. I was like, hey, can you send me a new one? And they're like, no. I'm like, why can't I have a nice copy of your book? And they're like, you're missing the point of our book. Our book is about the people. You're commodifying our book by, wanting it in nice shape, as a collectible. You've missed the point of our book. I'm like, right. I really like your book, but why are you criticizing that I want to collect your book? Like, that was weird. But anyway,
Yeah.
it's awesome that, you know, there's a chapter in there about him and his work, and even all the places where he would like hide his name, like in the bottom of like a Dagobah playset.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was fantastic. So what does he think of your work? Like how, or this scene, like does that, how does that that's got to be
Well,
weird.
well, you know, he really expressed how disappointed he was with everybody stealing his sculpts. No, I'm kidding. He wasn't like that at all. He, I think like if it would have been like one of the like sculptures that he did personally, like for his own portfolio for his background, that'd be another thing. But no, he was really interested in it. I think he was a little he's always been a little cynical of the, well, a lot of things, but very, very cynical about like the toy collectors and stuff like that would come through Cincinnati all the time. He's like, yeah, how many of them are living in their parents' basement still? Or yeah, you know,
Right.
like yeah, he's a funny guy, but he was really interested in it. He was like, this is kind of cool. And, you know, I thought about seeing if he wanted to do a few projects together in the early days of when I was kit bashing, more Star Wars stuff and more vintage stuff. And then I was like, maybe we should try making something. And he's like, yeah, totally. But I've taken him to 5 Points before a couple times. And he, or actually just once, but he really liked that. And he's like talking to people and talking about the stories of making all this stuff. And I think he's like, wow, this is not an expected turn that I was expecting, you know, that the toy or art and toys have made.
Sure.
You know?
I mean, coming from, you know, someone from that generation, I can only assume he went to school like to learn to sculpt or to learn how to make toys,
Yeah.
right? I mean, people had to go to school for that back then. Now
Well,
people,
yeah.
yep.
Oh, well, I was just going to say his background is he was actually a high school art teacher for a while. So he did art education and hated it. So he did it for a year. And then he went back to school and went for sculpture. And after he graduated, my mom and he moved to Somerset, Kentucky, and he was working like in the schools there. And then he got a job at Kenner.
And
But,
is he still working on toy projects?
yeah, he works for Super 7 sometimes.
Mhm.
And he, if anyone saw the Raider that Healy made, he sculpted that.
Nice. Was that
Yeah,
specific? Was that by accident or was that specifically by request?
it was specific. Like we all talk. So he talked to my dad, Steve, and asked if he was interested in it, and he was like, yeah, okay, I'll sculpt it. So he's done some work.
And what does he think of, because sculpting had changed so much? What does he think about being asked to sculpt something in this style from 40 years ago?
Well, he likes that more than having to sculpt from like a new standard, I think, because he's been doing that for so long now, since 76.
Sure. That's interesting because I mean, so many of, like, you could just imagine, like, if you're a sculptor and like as things change, you know, along comes like Toy Biz and then like McFarlane, and like what people are looking for in sculpts are getting, you know, they want these highly detailed, and that's not what I want. You know, I look at the Super 7 figures, I want my figure like reduced to like the vision of what I think it should have been 40 years ago, and then that makes me happy.
Right. Or, you know, even like with some of my personal preferences, I like seeing them more like in like those Marx figure styles sometimes too. It just depends. But yeah, the whole thing that I couldn't stand about toys in the 90s when I was a teenager was that I liked McFarlane and stuff like that for so long, and then I was just like, it's clunky, it falls over, and the parts warp, and it's just too much. Like I'm looking and I'm like, there's too many details.
Sure. I mean, I
yeah.
think there's a place for it, but I don't have
Sure.
nostalgia for it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I get it. And I'm sure if someone has a shelf of a bunch of open McFarlane toys all together, I'm sure it looks amazing. But I don't want that. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I went through a huge purge of like all my stuff in college where I got rid of a ton of stuff, and it was like McFarlane and the 90s Star Wars figures. I was just like, I don't want this stuff anymore, and it's taking up too much space.
Right. So just tell me about yourself and your art career. Like you said that teaching is creatively fulfilling. You also have an art career on the side. You're making figures, you're in art shows, you sell your own stuff. I mean, have you made it? Are you happy? Like, are you a content
Have I
artist?
made it? Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with what I'm doing. I like being able to work the way I work. Like I like being able, I think my dream job situation would be like if I were teaching 3 days a week at an elementary school, and then had the other 2 days to work at home on some more projects. Well, you know, sort of the factory line, so to speak.
Sure.
I'd love to be able to have that, or just do this full time. I don't know. I don't have like a specific I've made it kind of thing.
Mhm.
Not rich, not yet, but I'm thinking about starting a trust fund for myself. No, I'm just kidding. But I don't know. I think what I want to do is just make more and meet more people, see more things going on. I'm connecting like with a lot of people that are outside of toys. So that's kind of cool. It's really interesting to see who's into what I'm doing. Because I feel like there's a lot of people that were more into like the figurative elements or like comic book stuff, and have no, or may have limited experience or emotions about well, I don't know how to describe the art sometimes that I do, but like sort of the minimalist
Sure.
sort of packaging and odd
But
shapes. And
I
then
think
they're
it
like,
just
whoa.
I think it just takes time. I think, you know, you
Yeah.
start out in one place, and then as I guess what I would call your work is like more mature, right? I think you start to see a lot of things, and then it you sort of get bored of like the same old thing, and then you start to look. It's kind of like the way that I always described, you know, the Sucklord's work is like that he was kind of like the artist's artist, you know, and I think you kind of fall into that category. Like the people who like really like your stuff the most are like the other artists who see what you're doing and like get it like immediately. I think there's more of a process for other people like to kind of like get there, because they have to become sort of like jaded and bored with like the you know, it's like a regular it's kind of like people collect toys and they get kind of um they just see it as a commodity. They're just going to keep coming out with Star Wars toys all the time. There's no end to it. You can never be complete. You can never have it all. It will just and then they sort of discover the bootleg scene, and
Yeah.
then they sort of see like all these people's work doing all this different kind of stuff, and then I think when they stumble upon your work, it's like you've reduced it down. It's like I don't know. You have to have kind of like I always like I was saying about Morgan is like I described him as like the and you also as like the toy makers like those chefs that they, you know, when where their restaurants close at midnight, they all go to like
Oh, okay. Yeah.
the other chefs, you know, the place that
Right.
closes at 3 a.m, and I'll sit there and they all eat like seal eyeballs and, you know, all
Yeah.
this like crazy stuff. And
Yeah.
that's like, and only like these chefs like appreciate like this other chef's work. And I feel like you guys, I feel like the rest of the world is slowly coming around, but
Mhm.
like immediately, like the things that like, you know, that Mark Ultra and Healy and all those people like say about you, like And even, you know, Morgan is like the cattiest of them all. I remember talking to him about like, I need a list of artists I was working on something at the time, and, you know, he gave me a list, and like, you were like on the top of the list of like the other artists,
Oh,
like,
thanks.
you know, resident artists in the scene that needed to be included. And, you know, with no cattiness or at all, like, it's like, oh, like this dude's rad. Like, so
Oh, thanks.
I think, you know,
Thanks,
I don't know if you feel like you've made it, but I feel like you've made it.
I don't. Well, I mean, again, I don't know what it is. I feel like part of the feeling of maybe success is feeling like not just like selling so many of these products. That's cool though. It's cool. I mean, and everybody works a little bit differently. So at this point, I'd say it's just about like just exploring more, meeting more people, seeing what's out there. I guess that's sort of my philosophy. I don't have like I mean, you know, do some shows, be involved with that, collaborate with other artists. Yeah.
Well, I think you're doing a great job.
Well, thanks, Dov.
And I really appreciate you taking the time today. And I know you're busy. And but everyone here who's watching appreciates this, and thank you so much for your time. All right, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, talk to you later, bud. Bye,
All right,
guys.
take care. Thank you again.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Genius.